So just confirm that you can see my screen here.
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. So yeah, like I said, my name is Cassini Nazir. I teach, actually I should have changed this. I no longer teach at UT Dallas. I taught there for about 10 years in interaction design, user experience. I'll now be teaching at University of North Texas. Similar topics, different students. And you know, what we're going to talk about here is what interaction designers tend to create. We're going to start with an artifact that probably many of us have either created, if we're designers, and even if we're not, we've probably created some. And if you haven't created one, it's something that you have dealt with every single day. Let me help you along here. It's how we announce ourselves when we visit friends' homes. It's really what I use to type up this text. It's the thing that you probably have, it's all over the thing that you probably have your most intimate relationship with, your phone. It's what you may have used to snooze in this morning. And it's an object so amazing that you even came equipped with one in your belly. It's called a button. And what we're going to do today is take a little trip to take a look at the button. Now, the button is something that I had very little historical knowledge of prior to this. I should tell you, I still have little historical knowledge of it now. What's changed is that I have an opinion. And I think to start, we have to look to nature. It's common for designers to glean inspiration from nature. What we call this is, this field of study is called biomimicry. And there's a number of examples. This one you've probably heard. When George de Mestral in 1941 removed burrs from his dog in Switzerland, he decided to take a closer look at how this burr was sticking to his dog's fur. And he found that these small hooks at the end had these needles, and it inspired him to create what helped me as a child to put on shoes, Velcro. And without this material, you know, you can imagine what this material's been used for, from sporting events to young children to hospitals to all sorts of things. E.G. Nikatsu, who designed the Shinkansen train in Japan, he was an avid bird watcher, and when redesigning the train, this new train that was essentially supposed to go quite fast, would have created a lot of noise, he looked to nature to say, is there something that travels quickly and smoothly between two very different mediums? And when the Shinkansen train goes from sort of open air into mountain tunnels, it would create a loud boom. And he modeled that beak of the train after the beak of the kingfisher bird, which dives into bodies of water with very little splash to catch fish. And not only did it result in a quieter train, but it also used 15% electricity while also traveling 10% faster than the previous version of it. And so there's a lot we can learn from nature as designers. I always tell my students, if you stole it from me, chances are you stole it twice, because I stole it from somebody else, right? But I think nature has so many things for us to unravel. And here, for example, learning from the gecko on how to defy gravity, MIT researchers have discovered ways to climb buildings, as this gentleman is doing here, using sort of materials that are based off of the gecko's fingers over there on the left. We've also begun to unravel about creating energy, the sunflower, which changes its position perfectly during the day to mimic the sun as it moves around. Well, what if we were to take solar, oh man, my mind is blanking, solar power cells, and allow them to do the same as a sunflower. And this is actually in being developed at large scale to harvest the sun's rays with sort of very little loss of energy. We've learned from whale fins, which cut through air, through the sea to rise into the air. And we've applied that to create efficient wind power. And we've had something like 20% gains in the past 30 or so years in wind power. We've taken from dolphins who have this early warning system inside of them about how to detect tsunamis earlier. And we've learned from termite colonies, which here what you're looking at is a termite colony in Nigeria, which is in blazing heat. I mean, if you think Texas is bad, these termites are in these colonies that are sort of baking in 100+ degree weather, but they have created caverns and furrows that allow air to travel smoothly and keep the inside cool. So here on the right is also in Nigeria, a building that was built without any air conditioning whatsoever. And it uses the same structure of the termite colonies. Mosquitoes, I don't know about you, but I never can tell that a mosquito has stung me usually because of the way that its proboscis, its needle is shaped, allows it to bend at 6 different places, unlike the needles that we stick into our arms or from which we draw blood. So medical science is using these lessons from the mosquito to create a sort of a needle that sort of hurts less. And what we're seeing is that many of the objects today that we interact with, before they were actually Neolithic objects, were really just very primitive human interactions. And so that modern coffee cup over there on the left has its origins 6,000 years ago. And these are just objects that have survived maybe 10,000 BC when these things were created. We don't know, but the ones that have survived, some of the earliest are from around 6,000 BC. But as you can see, there's sort of primitive human interactions. The gesture of cupping our hands leads to the physical manifestation of that cup over there. And then many common interactions of yesterday are sort of represented as extensions of ourselves. So rather than using our hands to eat, we use something that might be a little bit more sophisticated and allows us to not be as messy. God forbid, but if you get into an accident and you were to jump out of your car and yell at the person who caused the accident, it's not incorrect to say, "You hit me," even though they didn't actually physically hit you, they hit your car. The car is really an extension of you. And we tend to see objects that we interact with as extensions of ourselves. And a lot of this, as I'm talking here early on, is about nature. John Ruskin, who died 201 years ago, reminds us to not just observe as interaction designers or user experience designers, not just to observe the world, not just to observe our users, but also to observe the world. Nature has these marvels that we have yet to understand. And you may have heard about the circular economy, which basically says that nothing's wasted, that anything that's produced in nature has value to something in nature. And we have a lot to learn from that notion as humans, as people who create, as designers. And, you know, a lot of this is about not necessarily learning about nature, but learning from nature. The MacBook Pro that I was expecting to be presenting on here today is a solid block of aluminum that was machined down to sort of what I'm interacting with. But nature isn't really subtractive, right? The machine that was created from a block of aluminum and then hollowed out, nature goes in the opposite direction. It's additive. Imagine going to your shoe store and instead of thousands of boxes, there's maybe 10 3D printers where they're additively printing your shoe. But as I mentioned to you, this talk's kind of starting with the button. So I just want to open it up here, and please turn on your microphones. Does the idea of the button occur in nature?
Yes.
It depends on how you define it.
Depends on how you define it. That's a very
Right.
designerly answer.
Yeah, by look or by function. Right. That's what I was trying to decide.
Okay, that's good. It certainly exists in the objects that we interact with. It's all over them. And just imagine how many buttons you've pressed today on your digital interactions. I'm going to unpack this question. Just give me a little time to unpack it. Put on your play hat and imagine you're a child in 10,000 BC. And you've heard that water essentially helps plants grow, but nobody's explained to you exactly how. Whereas a child in 10,000 BC, without a mental model of how plants grow, and again, remember, this is all that you've really seen of plants for the most part, where would you pour the water? I think what the child would end up doing is saying that, the stuff grows here. Well, water should go there too. I'm pouring water on the thing that I'm interacting with. It would probably be a waste to put the water on the ground. That's not what I want to grow. I want to grow the fruit that's coming off of the leaves. Now, I don't know, it may be news to you. I hope not, but that's incorrect. What actually happens is below what we can see. And this is a very simplified model, but essentially water gets absorbed from those things on the bottom, the roots, or the rhizome, or whatever it is underneath the ground, and water travels upward. It interacts with the sunlight that's there, and it takes in carbon dioxide, right? So essentially a really simplified model says water goes down there, stuff grows up there. And this is the concept of the button. Something sort of physically distanced from something else affects something else. Now that's like super simple, I know, but let's unpack that. All right, so an action here of watering the plant roots has a reaction there, which makes sort of the top of the plant grow. And that could be the fruit, that could be the leaves, what have you. And the qualities of this is that there's a visible action. And when I water a plant, I can, over time, see that reaction process. There's a tangible distance. If I'm watering a plant, it's not as though a plant 100 yards away is going to grow. It's going to be the plant where it's going to be in sort of near the distance of where the water is. And I can't really water things out of the sort of natural cycle of time. It just doesn't work that way. Things changed when we moved into the mechanical age, where an action here, moving a crank or a lever, essentially made an action more efficient. So what you're looking at is an Eli Whitney cotton gin. And you can follow the results pretty much in the cotton gin from sort of start to finish. It was most of cotton gins either use glass to prevent your arms from going into those toothed blades there. But essentially you hand cranked a cotton gin that used these row of teeth of saw blades that pull the cotton fibers through the channels so that those small seeds that are being deposited there were taken away. And as you can see at the bottom right, what a human would have taken 600 hours to have done would have taken a human cranking the cotton gin 1 hour to complete. And this was sort of the mindset in the mechanical age. I'm going to skip over this question here because also in the mechanical age was the Bessemer steel process. And when Henry Bessemer patented his process, you couldn't see inside the steel forge, but you could at least understand how it worked, right? You heat up the steel and you could see it being poured out into the cast or the mold. And as you can see there at the bottom right, 5 tons of iron heating that took a day, a full day. Bessemer's process had huge efficiency gains where it now took 20 minutes to heat steel. Steel mills still use this process, a modified version of the Bessemer process to this day. And buttons changed how we experience distance. When Samuel Morse created the telegraph. It compressed distance between people. There is now possible instant communication, very much in the same way that we're interacting here today, across hundreds of miles. Not too long after that was Alexander Graham Bell's telephone, where, it's kind of a funny story, he spilled some acid on his trousers, and he shouted to his assistant, essentially, who was in the other room, "Watson, come here, I want to see you." And the reason for that was because he spilled some acid on his trousers. I know some in the group might interpret acid a couple of different ways, but I'll leave that open to your interpretation. And then Marconi, who created the first radio transmission in the early 1900s, also changed how we interact with today. And essentially the world became smaller as a result of this. And not only did the button in the mechanical age make things more efficient, right? It also shortened the distance. And as we're seeing things here, the natural world isn't concerned with efficiency, but that's what the mechanical age was really about. The actions were visible, the reactions were mostly visible, and things were happening within sort of our close physical distance. It was semi-cyclical, right, within time, but it was really about efficiency. Over time, buttons began abstracting interactions. What you're looking at here is our buttons for an elevator. They changed how we experience time, and the railroads very much changed how we experience time for a variety of reasons that we're not necessarily going to go into here. But in the digital age, which, you know, the commercial digital age started in the 70s, pressing a button has the effect of making almost anything happen immediately. And we can press a button to ring a doorbell, to get ignored by the cat that's inside the house. We can press a button on a keyboard to print the screen to affect a result across the room. We've been able to do that for quite some time. And we've all been doing this. We've pressed a button here to shop from anywhere, to have Amazon or whomever it is deliver our packages. It doesn't even have to be on this planet. We can press a button here to send something outside of our planet. And perhaps the most drastic reality is that we can push a button and, you know, cause mass destruction. And where I'm going with this is that the button has sort of, it's a visible action, we can press it, but that invisible abstracted reaction process is very critical. That I don't always see the results of the buttons that I've pressed. I don't always see the people because they're abstracted, their distance from me is abstracted. I'm not seeing you right now, you're not seeing me. And then the time frame has been abstracted. But we do have exponential efficiencies there. You know, as I'm talking, you might reflect and ask yourself, in what ways have you pressed a button here and affected somebody else there? And unpack sort of the realities of that. It's not an easy thing necessarily, but it's interesting because what you're looking at here is Dallas-Fort Worth. And the further out we go, our capacity for empathy changes. We have a harder time feeling empathy for the world than we do for our neighbors, but yet what we interact with distances us further from the world. So in context of that, I'd like to talk to you about trust. And this is kind of a reflective talk. I'd like you to think of the person you trust the most. And if you have a sheet of paper in front of you, just try giving a sketch of that person as I'm talking here, sketching that person out. And as you're doing that, also think of 3 words that best describe that person. And I'm just going to give you a few seconds to answer that last question on your own, individually. What 3 words might best describe that person you trust most? And then finally, might those words that you use to describe that person you trust most also be true of you? So as we delve into this, I just want to frame it that way. Turns out there's a ton of academic research on this. This slide that I'm not expecting you to review basically highlights some of the key academic literature on trust for the past 40 or so years. And Sean Burke, who's at University of Florida, ended up summarizing trust into 3 attributes. They may or may not be the attributes that you used for the individual for whom you have the highest degree of trust. Those attributes are ability, integrity, and benevolence. And these 3 common pillars sort of summarize all of the academic literature that we just saw on trust. Is defined by skills, competencies, or characteristics that allow an individual to have influence with others. Integrity is our perception of how well that person adheres to principles that we find acceptable. It's not whether or not they actually do, keep in mind. It's our perception of whether or not they do. And then finally, benevolence is demonstrated genuine care about others and authentic concern. So let's just take this thought experiment a little bit further. If we were to say that we can put a number on all of these attributes, these 3 attributes, we can come up with a trust index. So if 10 is the highest number on a trust index would be 1,000. Let's take a look at some examples. Perhaps Captain Picard from Star Trek: The Next Generation might fit that 1,000 level trust index. He has high ability, he has high benevolence, he has high integrity. I welcome your feedback on whether or not Captain Picard is an ideal there. Let's take a look at low ability, but high benevolence and high integrity. So you can score high on 2, but have a blind spot in a 3rd. And we can argue about this, but Michael Scott from The Office might demonstrate that. I'm being very kind to him on integrity. I'm being very kind to him on benevolence, but I'm probably being accurate on ability. His ability is very low. So you can have a 1, but still have a decent number in your trust index. But if you score a 0, right, anything times 0 is 0. Your total score in your total index is 0. And unfortunately, the first 2 are examples of people who are fictional. It doesn't take it doesn't take much imagination to think very hard about people for whom, right, their integrity is 0. And Harvey Weinstein is one of many that we could have pulled from here. But if you score low on any of those, or excuse me, if you score a 0 on any of those, doesn't matter how high your ability is, your total trust index is 0. And you might take a moment to think about yourself. How would you as an individual rate yourself on a scale from 0 to 10? And this is really easy to do. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's however you judge yourself to be. I would go with your gut. But between ability, integrity, and benevolence, take a moment, if you have a sheet of paper or on the computer that's in front of you, scale of 1 to 10, 1 being low, 10 being high, rate yourself on ability, integrity, and benevolence. Now, designers work on teams. So as we expand the scope of trust, take a moment to rate the ability, the integrity, and the benevolence of your team, whatever team you work on. And if you're not currently working on a team, think about a team where you are high functioning or high performing, and rate the ability of that high functioning or high performing team, or excuse me, rate the ability, integrity, and benevolence of the high functioning team. And finally, we usually work on teams in the context of an organization, a company, an institution. How would you rate that company? And I'm just going to show you an example here that's representative of the times that I've done this. Most people are honest when they're honest with themselves. There's usually one category that's higher than others. In this case, it's ability for this individual. But they generally tend to think, and this may be true for you if you've gone through and done this, they generally tend to think that the ability of the team together is higher than their individual ability. But the higher up you go, from the designer to the team to the company, most people will end up rating integrity and benevolence of the company the lowest. They'll also generally rate the ability lower, but generally integrity and benevolence changes at the level of the organization. And it's an interesting phenomenon. Now, we just did a snapshot in time. You know, a question might be, where do you see yourself if you were to stay on that same team inside that same company a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? You may not be on that same team 5 or 10 years from now, but where might you want to grow? Keep in mind that as you move up in management, your emotional intelligence tends to get lower. So managers, the third one from the left there, tend to have higher emotional intelligence because they have to deal with the people to the right of them and report up to directors all the way up to CEOs. They also have to manage downward the individuals and bosses of the individuals as well. So they tend to score higher on emotional intelligence, while CEOs who deal less and less directly with employees score the lowest, unfortunately. And for this reasons, I think the shape of trust is a cloud. And if you try to describe a cloud to somebody who's never seen one, it is extremely hard to describe it. There's not a static point for a cloud. It is forever changing. You know, you can see it, but if you've ever been in an airplane and flown through a cloud, you can't really grasp it. We think of it as a source of beauty, right? His head's in the clouds, or a place of destruction. Right? Rain clouds can create great destruction. We also tend to think of clouds as a place that we aspire to, and a place for our imagination. It's a complex place that's forever moving. And so is trust. Trust is something that, whether or not we realize it, we may take a snapshot in our mind, but trust amongst individuals is always changing. And there is a cultural component to that. And you may be familiar with Aaron Meyer's 8 factors of cultural communications. They're listed here. And I'll make these slides available so that you can go back and review this. I just wanted to take one of the examples. So she's taken a look at cultural context from 8 constructs, from communicating to scheduling all the way down there at the bottom. And here on this slide, we're looking at where businesses in the US tend to be. We tend to be low context. We prefer precise, clear, simple communication. We want applications first rather than principles first over there on persuading. And trust in the US tends to be task-based. You do good work consistently and you're reliable, so I trust you. Whereas in relationship-based cultures, trust builds slowly over time. I know who you are, I've seen you at a deep level, we share some personal time together. Therefore, as a result of that shared time, I trust you. And you can look at all of these here, but let's just examine trust a little bit more inside these cultural contexts. I'm from a very small country called Trinidad. It's 60 miles at its longest point. It has 1.5 million people. Dallas-Fort Worth is physically larger and has a larger population than my entire country. But we're probably closer to the right on relationship-based. And you might also look at individuals inside your organization, right? I imagine the CEO is the most task-based individual. The directors, the managers, the executives are highly task-based. What's your performance? But you probably have a closer relationship with your coworkers. They tend to be closer to the right. And if you have a coworker on the same team, you probably have a very relationship-based trust factor with that individual. You may go to lunch with them. You may text them or call them. Whereas somebody on a different team or an overseas team, you probably are looking more at what's their work output, how productive are they, or how unproductive are they, might just put it another way. And so trust is woven very differently depending on our relationships with individuals. Now, all of this is in the context of design. I'm sure Dieter Rams' 10 factors of design here is not new to you. He came up with this in the late 70s at Witzu in Germany, and in New York, actually, not in Germany. But you might say, if I were to ask you, where is trust in this? You might say, oh, there it is on number 6. It's honest. But I would argue to you that trust is throughout here. From the very last detail, number 8, to making a product understandable, to making something long-lasting, to making something that's useful. All of these are factors of trust. Good design is good trust. And I think because we live in a world in which I can press a button here and be distanced from other individuals, things have changed. So Rachel Botsman, who is at Oxford University, who studies trust, she's come up with a model, 3 models that sort of explain it. That at one point in time, we had local trust. I live physically close to you in my hut in 6000 BC, so I trust you. As things changed, we had trust distributed through institutions such as the church or government or other institutions. Because you are a respected leader inside that institution, I trust you. And then we had distributed trust because because of the brand of the clothing, I trust that this is high quality. And so those are the 3 models. But I think trust has always been over there on the right. I think trust has always been distributed. It was just more slowly distributed in time. And because of that, we have to kind of look at how we grew up. And to do that, let's take a moment to explore our imaginations. Now, for the sake of time, I'm not going to ask you to answer this here. As a child, my brothers and I have good memories of playing Monopoly with my brothers. Maybe some of you played Tetris as kids. I certainly did. And you'll remember that Tetris has very strict rules that don't change, but only get faster as you move forward. Minecraft, which some of your children may have grown up playing, is absolutely the opposite. The only rules are those that I create. There are no rules in Minecraft. What would be different about you if you grew up playing Minecraft instead of the games that you played? Might your view of trust be different? And a lot of that is contextual. Every generation has a unique sort of technological trend that can be tied to it, which allows it to have a unique technological imagination. Our imagination changed in 1969 as a country when we sent somebody to the moon, and the word moonshot lost its meaning. It used to be something that was impossible. But in the 70s, work became digital. And what were physical folders now were were able to be stored digitally in digital folders. In the 90s, we got connected commercially and across the world. The internet had been around for much longer than 1995, but people began getting connected with America Online, CompuServe, et cetera, in beginning sort of widespread in 1995. After people got connected with the internet, we saw the beginnings of this in 2015, that things got connected. You may have an Alexa, a Google Home, any of these devices. You may have a smartwatch. Your fridge may be connected to the internet. Your stove may be connected to the internet. And there's this proliferation of connected devices. And as I look forward, I think that as things got connected in 2015, soon those things will behave like humans, only better. And that is to be described. What I mean by better is more well-behaved than we are. Not necessarily better than humans, but behave better than we do. They won't necessarily throw temper tantrums. And I'm not a techno-positivist in that statement. But the scale of each of these effects of technology indicates that they're the same, and they're not. They're actually increasingly outsized. What happened with one, when work became digital, will be smaller in scale and size as we move forward. So if you're familiar with sort of combinatorial innovation, as work became digital, the wave effect of people getting connected became larger. The wave effect of things getting connected means that not only can hackers hack into my computers, they can now hack into my IoT devices. The real question is, what will happen as we move into stage 4? Now, I may be wrong that things behave like humans, but that seems to be the trend that we're moving towards. I did some consulting for Toyota on looking at future of interfaces 5 to 10 years from now. And the future of autonomy is interesting. Autonomous vehicles. We're currently in a level 2 autonomy where the system acquires information for us. It tells us how much gas we have. You have tire pressure monitoring systems in your car that tell you how much air you have without you having to go and check that. And then everything else happens between you and the car. You analyze the situation, you decide, you act as the human. In a level 5 autonomy scenario, the system acts on our behalf. It analyzes, it decides on our behalf. And there are some benefits to this, certainly. But we're moving where technology is not just going to do things for us, like controlling and guiding, where I decide on the goal, and here for the vehicle may decide how. I may very well begin delegating or even collaborating with, in this case, my vehicle or technology. And this is my last act here, which requires us to maybe move towards some kind of action. So I'm going to leave you with 3 points. We as designers are known for having the HMWs, how might we statements, that begin and frame our challenges. I think that's an important question, but I would add to that also the question, why should we? You've probably seen the IBM slides that talk about how might we design a better way to enjoy flowers in the home as opposed to design a better vase. So that's the classic design thinking slide. But asking why should we forces our brains into a different set of vectors. Why is it important to do that? Why, and it very well may be, but we need to sort of understand and unpack those components. So I would challenge you, not only just ask the HMW, but the WSW. Why should we? Challenge number 2 is an unfortunate challenge. If you're an architect, you have to abide to a code of ethics made up of 6 canons. and increasing obligations to sort of larger scale and scope, from yourself to the public to, as you can see the continuum on the right. I'm an interaction designer. I never signed a code of ethics. UX designers usually don't sign codes of ethics. There's none that fundamentally exists across all user experience designers. But unlike buildings, which have sort of, here's the WELL building standards, which have been adapted to UX design here. Unlike buildings, we have no code of ethics. Right? We have general obligations to all of these as well. So I would encourage you to write your own code of ethics. When an architect fails, a building falls. But when a user experience designer fails, many other things can fall as a result of that as well. You've probably heard, I think it was Sweden, or maybe Denmark. Yeah, I think it was Denmark that used Google Translate to translate the Epic medical system. So instead, and the translation was infamously incorrect. The doctor could amputate either my left leg or the correct leg. And you can see where these sorts of mistranslations could have huge problems. A lot of things happen when we as user experience designers don't manage our obligations. And then lastly, my last challenge to you is that find your voice. Oftentimes, if I will reach out to an individual that I know quite well for advice, but if you were to ask me what advice that individual would give me, I could probably tell you what they would say because I know them so well. And I think the reason why we reach out for that advice is that we actually need to hear it from somebody that we ourselves trust. It may very well be the person that I asked you to draw earlier. That knowing, but needing to hear from somebody else, tells us that our instincts are usually honed enough that we know the things we need to do. We oftentimes just need to hear it and be in a community of others in order to move forward. But I suspect everyone in this room, virtual room, knows the things that they need to do in order to become a better designer. And so I would challenge you to write your own unique challenge to yourself. Let me just leave you with a very simple story. The story is of Antaeus, who was a very famous wrestler in Greece. Given sort of superpowers, Antaeus was invincible as a wrestler, so long as Antaeus stayed in contact with the ground. And it's a very interesting story because Hercules was able to conquer Antaeus, essentially by lifting Antaeus off the ground and choking him. The question is, what things help to keep you grounded? I think we as designers reside in creativity, and there are some things that help to keep us grounded. What are those things that will help to keep you grounded? Thank you for your time. I think we're going to move into a Q&A. I hope we're okay on time here. I'm going to stop screen share.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot to unpack here, Cassini.
Should have had you put on your seatbelt.
It's a lot there. So let's take some time for Q&A. If you want to unmute and.
First of all, I'm just going to say